So, einen wunderschönen guten Nachmittag an alle Palantir-Investoren oder die es gerne werden möchten und natürlich auch an alle Palantir-Kritiker. Alle sind herzlich willkommen an diesem wichtigen Tag, denn Palantir hat heute in der Vorbörse den Quartalsbericht zum vierten Quartal vorgestellt. Und meine Güte, aktuell ist es ja wirklich eine sehr bewegte Zeit am Markt. Egal, wo man hinschaut, wenn Unternehmenszahlen veröffentlicht werden, gibt es massive Kurssprünge in die eine oder in die andere Richtung. Insofern war es auch nicht verwunderlich, dass die Palantir-Aktie heute auch ziemlich deutlich ausgeschlagen ist. Leider natürlich in eine Richtung, die wir uns als Aktionäre nicht gewünscht hatten. Ich persönlich habe es aber für relativ wahrscheinlich gehalten, dass die Aktie so reagiert. Wobei man auch sagen muss, wenn man sich mal das Volumen anschaut, ihr seht also hier um 5 Minuten nach 12 kam der Bericht und sofort stürzte die Aktie um zeitweise 15% in den Keller. Wenn man sich aber das Volumen anschaut, dann basierte dieser Kursabsturz auf nur in Anführungsstrichen knapp einer Viertelmillion Aktien. Also 250.000 Aktien, Pi mal Daumen, haben diesen Kursrutsch ausgelöst, was natürlich im Großen und Ganzen, wenn man sich zum Beispiel das durchschnittliche Tagesvolumen anschaut, das sind ungefähr 60 Millionen Stück pro Tag für die Palantir-Aktie, dann ist das also kein massiver Abverkauf. Also man kann nicht sagen, dass da jetzt die großen Fische plötzlich abgesprungen sind, sondern da hat halt irgendein wahrscheinlich institutioneller Investor einfach mal so eine Viertelmillion Aktien abgestoßen und damit diesen Kursrutsch ausgelöst. Aber die große Frage ist ja, ist dieser Kursverfall in der Palantir-Aktie gerechtfertigt oder nicht? Sind die Zahlen gut oder schlecht? Diese Frage werden wir in diesem Livestream natürlich beantworten. Und dann in 11 Minuten und 50 Sekunden beginnt die Videokonferenz mit dem Management von Palantir. Ich weiß gar nicht, ob Alex Karp persönlich dabei ist. Ich würde mal davon ausgehen, dass er dabei ist. Und wir werden dann sehen, was das Management von Palantir zu diesem Quartalsbericht zu sagen hat. Also, gehen wir in die Zahlen rein. Ganz kurze Meldung vom heutigen Sponsor dieses Livestreams. Investieren an der Börse sind Risiken kaum zu vermeiden. Im Leben außerhalb des Aktienmarktes helfen Versicherungen. Aber wer hat schon Zeit, sich mit dem Thema Versicherungen zu beschäftigen? Deshalb empfehle ich euch Clark, um eure Versicherungen zu analysieren, zu verwalten und zu optimieren. Zum Beispiel meine private Haftpflichtversicherung. Sie gehört definitiv zu den wichtigsten Versicherungen überhaupt. Sie deckt Sachschäden, Personenschäden und Vermögensschäden ab. Sie wird deshalb allen Erwachsenen ausnahmslos empfohlen. Die Clark-App zeigt mir jetzt an, dass das Preisniveau meiner Versicherung eher durchschnittlich ist. Mit wenigen Klicks kann ich dann bessere Alternativen finden und direkt in der App den Wechsel veranlassen. Die App ist in Deutschland und in Österreich verfügbar. Melde dich jetzt bei Clark an, lade deine Versicherungen hoch und sichere dir mit dem Gutscheincode 100x einen Amazon-Gutschein von bis zu 45 €. Ja, vielen Dank an Clark für die freundliche Unterstützung dieses Kanals. Aber gehen wir mal in die Zahlen gemeinsam rein und schauen, ob das Ergebnis wirklich einen Abverkauf von 15%, mittlerweile hat sich die Aktie wieder ein bisschen erholt, aber zeitweise 15%, aktuell 8,7% Abverkauf rechtfertigt oder nicht. So, wichtige Frage natürlich, was hat der Markt eigentlich erwartet? Mit welchen Erwartungen ist der Markt in den heutigen Tag reingegangen und wie hat Palantir geliefert? Schauen wir uns mal die 3 wichtigsten Punkte an. Das heißt Umsatz, Gewinn pro Aktie und natürlich im Moment besonders wichtig ist der Ausblick auf das nächste Quartal, also das jetzt laufende Quartal, das erste Quartal 22. Da sehen wir also, dass der Markt hier einen Umsatz für Palantir von 417 Millionen prognostiziert hatte. Tatsächlich wurden es aber 432 Millionen. Also deutlich mehr Umsatz als vom Markt prognostiziert. Das ist positiv. Dann haben wir den Gewinn pro Aktie. Und das ist, glaube ich, der Punkt, wo dann die Algorithmen in der Vorbörse gesagt haben, verkaufen, 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 vollautomatisiert wird abgestoßen, weil nämlich der Gewinn pro Aktie hier deutlich verfehlt. 2 Cent Gewinn pro Aktie, geschätzt waren 4 Cent Gewinn pro Aktie. Ist das ein Punkt, der mich als Aktionär von Palantir beunruhigt? Ganz ehrlich, nein. Denn der Gewinn pro Aktie, also der Nettogewinn geteilt durch die Anzahl der ausstehenden Aktien, das ist eine Zahl, die für ein Wachstumsunternehmen nicht besonders relevant ist. Denn der Fokus eines Wachstumsunternehmens ist ja nicht, möglichst viel Gewinn auszuweisen, dann darauf Steuern zu bezahlen und dann vielleicht eine Dividende auszuschütten und all diese Dinge. Das sind Dinge, die Firmen machen, die schon viel, viel weiter sozusagen am Ende ihrer Wachstumsgeschichte stehen, sondern ein Wachstumsunternehmen nimmt die Bruttogewinne, die Palantir erwirtschaftet, also auf der Bruttomarge ist Palantir natürlich profitabel, und reinvestiert diese Bruttogewinne dann in Wachstum, in Forschung und Entwicklung, in den Aufbau des Personals, in den Aufbau eines Vertriebsteams. Das heißt, Palantir kann im Grunde steuern und entscheiden, wie viel Gewinn am Ende rausfallen soll. Und wenn Sie aber sagen, wir investieren jetzt erstmal lieber, anstatt Gewinne auszuweisen, dann sinkt eben am Ende der Gewinn pro Aktie. Hätten Sie ein paar weniger Leute eingestellt oder hätten Sie die Forschungsausgaben etwas zurückgedreht, dann hätten Sie diese 4 Cent auch erreichen können oder sogar übertreffen können. Haben Sie aber nicht gemacht. Sie sind weiter auf dem Wachstumskurs. Wichtig ist aber, wie das fundamentale Geschäft sich weiterentwickelt, wie es wächst, wie die Produkte besser werden, wie die Kunden mehr werden, wie die Kunden größere Aufträge absetzen. Alles das ist viel relevanter als die Frage, wie viel bleibt unterm Strich übrig, jedenfalls in der aktuellen Phase. Das ist meine kurze Zusammenfassung zu dieser Zahl. Aber wenn wir uns dann die Q1-Prognose anschauen, auch die war besser als erwartet. Denn Palantir sagt, im jetzt laufenden Quartal werden wir höchstwahrscheinlich 443 Millionen Umsatz erzielen. Vom Markt geschätzt waren nur 439 Millionen. Das heißt, aktuell ist die einzige negative Interpretation, die wir hier sehen können, dass die Profitabilität von Palantir die Erwartungen des Marktes nicht erfüllt hat. Aber sie machen mehr Umsatz und auch das Umsatzwachstum im jetzt laufenden Quartal wird besser ausfallen, wahrscheinlich, als zuvor angenommen. Wenn wir uns noch ein paar andere Zahlen anschauen, dann kommen wir einige sehr spannende Punkte raus, bevor wir dann in 6 Minuten in die Videokonferenz rüberschalten. Zum Beispiel sehen wir, dass sich das Umsatzwachstum jetzt wieder beschleunigt. Und das, liebe Leute, ist ein ganz, ganz wichtiger Punkt, der mich sehr freut zu sehen. Denn im letzten Quartal haben wir gesehen, dass sich das Wachstum etwas abgeflaut hat. Wir hatten im Q2 zum Q3 nur ein 4%iges Wachstum. Jetzt, von Q3 zu Q4, hatten wir ein 10%iges Umsatzwachstum. Das heißt, die Wachstumsraten von Palantir beschleunigen sich wieder. Sie wachsen wieder schneller. Und das ist für mich ein sehr wichtiges Signal, dass die Wachstumsgeschichte von Palantir nach wie vor intakt ist. Und auch, obwohl das neue Vertriebsteam, die neue Vertriebsstrategie von Palantir noch gar nicht vollkommen ausgebaut und ausgereizt ist. Das heißt, ich glaube, der Großteil dieser neuen Strategie, diese Effekte und diese Wachstumsraten werden wir erst in den kommenden Quartalen sehen. Trotzdem schön schon mal zu sehen, dass auch schon bereits im 4. Quartal das Wachstum wieder angezogen hat. Oh, es geht schon los bei Palantir. Ich mache nochmal ganz kurz auf Stumm. Ich glaube, das ist erstmal nur ein Intro. Das heißt, wir haben noch ganz kurz Zeit, uns noch ein paar andere Zahlen anzuschauen. Zum Beispiel, dass das Segment der, also sie haben ja im Grunde 2 Umsatzsegmente. Einmal Government und einmal Commercial. Also einmal den Umsatz mit Regierungsbehörden, dem Militär, und diesen Dingen, den staatlichen Einrichtungen und dann eben mit den privaten Unternehmen. Und wir sehen hier, dass der Umsatz mit den Regierungsbehörden auch weiter wächst und auch sich hier das Wachstum beschleunigt, von 22 auf 26% Wachstum, dass aber das Wachstum im kommerziellen privaten Sektor noch schneller wächst. Wie ihr hier seht, von 103% auf 132% für den US-Sektor und weltweit gesehen von 37 auf 47% der weltweite kommerzielle Sektor. Das heißt, der private Sektor wird für Palantir zunehmend wichtiger und wächst schneller als der Regierungssektor. Und das ist der zweite wichtige Punkt, den ich sehr positiv finde, denn klar, Umsätze mit Regierungsbehörden sind schön und gut und wichtig und sind auch ein wichtiges Standbein für Palantir und das wird auch lange so bleiben. Aber ich möchte, dass der private Sektor, dass die Unternehmen verstärkt auf Palantir setzen und Palantir weniger abhängig wird von den Umsätzen aus dem Regierungssektor. So, dann die Folie fand ich noch ganz spannend, denn hier vergleichen sie sich mal mit anderen Unternehmen aus dem Bereich Software und Service, die an der Börse gelistet sind. Das heißt, jeder dieser grauen Punkte repräsentiert ein Unternehmen, das an der Börse gelistet ist. Und sie vergleichen hier zum einen den Free Cashflow und die Wachstumsrate. So, der schwarze Punkt hier, das ist Palantir. Hier. Und jetzt kann man sozusagen das in 4 Sektoren einteilen. Diese ganzen Unternehmen hier, der Großteil der Unternehmen, würde ich sagen, die haben zum einen weniger Wachstum als Palantir, aber auch weniger Cashflow. Man kann sagen, das sind die im Vergleich zu Palantir, die komplett ablosen in Bezug auf Wachstum und Free Cashflow. Dann haben wir diese Unternehmen hier, die zwar mehr Cashflow haben als Palantir, dafür aber deutlich weniger wachsen. Dann haben wir dieses Segment hier, das sind die Unternehmen, die zwar schneller wachsen als Palantir, dafür aber deutlich weniger Free Cashflow haben. Und dann haben wir nur noch 1, 2, 3, ja, man könnte vielleicht sagen 4, gerade so, 4 Unternehmen aus dem Segment Software und Services, die an der Börse gelistet sind, die schneller wachsen und mehr Cashflow haben als Palantir. Ihr seht also, Palantir ist hier im Vergleich zu vielen anderen Unternehmen extrem gut aufgestellt. Ich schiele mal oben auf den Livestream, geht noch nicht los. Das heißt, wir können uns vielleicht nochmal die ein oder andere Folie anschauen. 71% mehr Kunden als im Jahr 20. Also 71% Kundenwachstum von 20 zu 21. Wir sehen auch hier die Beschleunigung in der Quartalsübersicht. Das heißt, wir hatten im ersten Quartal 19%, dann 28%, dann 37% und jetzt im vierten Quartal 47% in Bezug auf die Anzahl der Kunden. Das heißt hier Beschleunigung. Wichtig, ganz, ganz wichtig. Dann haben wir auch eine Beschleunigung in Bezug auf US Commercial, also den Privatsektor in den USA. 72%, 90%, 103% und dann zuletzt 132%. Beschleunigung. Frage im Chat gerade, wer sind die 4 Unternehmen? Die sind hier leider namentlich nicht genannt. Kann ich dir nicht sagen, wer diese 4 Unternehmen sind. Könnte man vielleicht mal recherchieren. Ist bestimmt nicht allzu schwer herauszufinden. Das hatten wir dann hier, ganz wichtig. Das Vertriebsteam von Palantir wurde im Jahr 21 massiv aufgebaut. Von 12 Leuten auf jetzt 80 Leute, die also in der Welt unterwegs sind und die Palantir-Software vertreiben und an den Mann bringen und an die Frau bringen. Und das ist eben eines der wichtigen Investments, die Palantir gerade tätigt. Sie investieren in ihr Vertriebsteam, um eben im Financial Year 22, also in diesem Jahr, das Wachstum weiter zu beschleunigen. So, ich glaube, das waren alle Folien. Ach nee, die Margen hatten wir noch. Schaffen wir das noch schnell? Die Bruttomarge ist stabil bei 80%. Klar, ist eine Softwarefirma. Das heißt, diese Bruttomarge von 80% ist hier sehr ansehnlich, aber auch nichts Besonderes für eine Softwarefirma. Was aber interessant ist, dass die operative Marge ohne SBC, also ohne die Aktienpakete, bereits jetzt sehr, sehr gut ist. Nämlich bei zuletzt 29%. Warum rechnen Sie die Aktienpakete raus? Naja, wenn Palantir Aktienpakete an seine Mitarbeiter verteilt, als Bonus oder wenn sie in die Firma kommen oder eben als Teil des Gehalts, dann werden diese Aktienpakete ja quasi aus dem Nichts erschaffen. Ja, das ist da muss keiner an die Kasse gehen und das aus der Unternehmenskasse rausnehmen. Das hat keinen Einfluss auf den Cashflow. Aber in der Buchhaltung und in der Berechnung des Gewinns der Firma werden diese Aktienpakete trotzdem abgezogen, so als ob, und ich sehe gerade Alex Karp ist auf dem Bildschirm, das heißt, wir schalten gleich rüber, werden diese Aktienpakete abgezogen, als hätten sie einen Einfluss auf den Cashflow, haben sie aber nicht. Das heißt, 14% minus, wenn man die Aktienpakete rausrechnet, kommen wir auf 29% plus. Das ist sozusagen die reale operative Marge, die hier schon positiv ist. So, Alex Karp spricht, wir gehen rüber, bis später.
One of the very interesting things that's happened to Palantir is we've been able to see how the world has changed dramatically in its perception of software and, of course, of us, from a world where software was something that you might want, might be in your car, but de facto would not determine your business, to a world where really the laws of finance are going to be rewritten to deal with a world where the only real moat is software. How do you measure it? What does it look like? How do you understand when it's creating value? How do you understand when it's declining in value? How do you understand when it's compounding? To what extent is it compounding? What devices do we use to measure that? Are the devices we use to measure it the ones that we used in the past? Clearly, this industry is in its infancy. What's also very special about this industry is it really is, by and large, geographically located in a small section of America, which is odd, and there's lots of interesting reasons for that, but enterprise software is something that America is by far the best at. What we see currently at Palantir, it's not just the best at building it, it seems to also be the best at understanding what software developments are relevant for the world today, and adapting even when it's being offered by a company that in every way looks non-standard, run by people that are very different, look different, feel different, talk differently, and with a CEO that many view as batshit crazy. And so, just as an interesting prelude, I don't want to take a ton of time with remarks because I think, when I'm watching these things, if someone talks too long or there's like a lot of canned remarks, I wonder why. And it honestly gets a little boring. Of course, our legal department and IR department, which are wonderful departments, have a cane ready to pull me out if I'm not like a caged animal in the 1950s zoo. But as I've mentioned to them, if you want caged animals in the 1950s zoo, you can watch any other earnings update. So here you see an interesting chart. We sent this out. Some of you have probably looked at it. Some have maybe even studied it. Some of you haven't seen it. What's interesting here, what I thought would be very interesting for people who are investors, potential investors, also Palantirians, both current and ex, is our journey, and what I actually believe this is a metaphor for the journey of all software companies. We were very early into whatever you want to call data exploration, building things that that would now be understood as useful software for building analytic tools. Some of them were and are very, very important for national security and other areas, but then we're not, obviously, because they were built and conceived in 2004, delivered in 2008. We're not actually able to migrate across the chain into what people will need tomorrow, or people are already seeing that they need today, which is essentially not having software as a raw material exploration. You take the data like it's oil, you pump it out, you churn it, and then you say you've churned the data and you move on, but actually operationally determinative for your business, What you see here is cohort analysis. This is and what you see is from inception of Foundry, the decline of older software products and just the massive exponential growth. Obviously, it's rough math, it's 100% growth year on year. And then starting last year, not off of a small integral, which is obviously very important because, you know, small numbers can grow quickly even if the software is not strong. Big numbers don't grow quickly if the software doesn't exist, especially given that our sales force is super nascent. We're building it quickly, but we only have 25 fully accredited software. Fully accredited meaning they've been here for 9 months or more. And what you see here, obviously the CAGR here is just unbelievable, and in like the 150 plus range, which is super interesting. And I wanted to drop the F-bomb here, but I was told that was probably inappropriate. But you could definitely, we've agreed that this is something like the Phoenix Rises. You don't get this. And the other thing that's kind of anti-gravitational about this that, you know, it's easy to forget. This is a company, this is like, we've been at this for, you know, over 15 years. There are certain laws of nature in business that we are defying, which is that a software company, software usually decays for lots of reasons, decays radically. And so when you see a decline or a software product, it's also basically not part of the law of nature for a software company to build new software. Really, as far as I know, we are the only software company in the world building transformational software this far in. And that's particularly important because most software companies have distribution or they have a product, but they don't have distribution, product, and ability to build new products, which is not a critique. These are great companies. They acquire companies. There are not that many companies to acquire, which is why even relatively weak companies get acquired at a very high price. Let's just look at the next chart, which is USG. USG, you have a very similar phenomenon where you see the inception of Foundry into the USG. There's a lot here. There's a lot of qualitative stuff here that we can't explain, but one of the qualitative things that you kind of can get a sense of is the newer Foundry version not only grows dramatically with, like, you know, this is like 65% growth just without looking at it more precisely, but it's like over 200% CAGR here, which is also like Phoenix Rises kind of thing. But what's qualitatively particularly important and very protective is this graphs pretty neatly onto what are the programs that are going to grow tomorrow. Where's the future of USG? What do we need in a world where people are recognizing it's very dangerous? And what would the products be that you would need to power that? And so, in any case, with that, I think we should head into questions.
Great, thanks, Alex. Our first question is from Brent Thill with Jefferies. Brent, you'll receive a prompt to unmute, and please ensure your video is on.
Thanks. Good morning, Alex. When you go back to the sales,
by the way, we can't see you.
Through your overall view on what you need to do on the sales force to get that building in the right direction, and what your plans for capacity are in 2022.
By the way, it would have been wonderful to see you. But yes, I think the question was, what can we do to build on our building the sales force next year or this year and the next year? So there are really two parts to the question. One part, I think, is just to look at what's happening. And so, like, what is growing Palantir now, and how can we accelerate it? So if you just, what I want to do in this call and in future encounters is to kind of, what I think is happening, and just to frame the question, what I think is happening at Palantir is you have what you saw in Silicon Valley 1.0, when Silicon Valley actually produced goods and services that people wanted, which was they built dual use products in government, and there was a handoff to commercial. And so that's going very well. So you see, even if you adjust for SPAC, organic growth in commercial last year, US was 80%, or just under 80%. It was like 76, 77%. But to your point, And that you see net dollar retention numbers that you financial people like. How much is it growing? What I would call actually organically, what I guess you guys call net dollar retention. Very, very strong, like in the 150 range. We have Glazer here. He'll pipe in with but it's roughly in that range. But what we do not have, you could look at it as a negative, is like we basically are doing this with a very, very nascent, honestly, if I were not on TV, I would say bonkers small sales force. And so like that means two things. What does it mean on the positive side? It means that net dollar retention number is awesome, because my understanding of how this happens at other companies is like 8 people running around begging the person to expand their deployment. That's not happening at Palantir. The salesperson there is the Foundry product by and large. So obviously that means we think we can get lift from hiring salespeople. We're doing that aggressively. I think we have about 150 salespeople now. We're in the market to hire aggressively across Palantir. Honestly, mostly not salespeople, because we believe we live and die based on our ability to build products of tomorrow, deliver today. But we're going to hire in the range of 200 people. Hiring and getting value out of them are two different things. And so I think one of the things that we will see going forward is how do we play these salespeople so that we can get as much lift from them as we're getting from the product itself. And we're at the beginning of that. And so it is the people we've fully indoctrinated, or as normal people might say, trained, are effective, but we've never done this before. There'll be that's a process. We're also looking at ways to learn from other companies, but that's going to happen over the next couple of years. I think the primary driver of revenue in U.S. commercial this year will still just be the way in which America, the IT organizations are actually beginning to request, without knowing Foundry sometimes, what Foundry offers. The CEOs assume that this is available. There is no other product on the market that can actually move from, data warehouse, which is like, there's like 5 companies, they all offer the same thing. Foundry interacts with all of them. When you want to move up to the chain to actually solving a real problem, because it defines your business, Foundry's highly differentiated. So we will layer that. I think it's way too early to know exactly the impact. Obviously, to the extent we get this to work, you could expect even higher growth than what we have, although I'm very happy with it. Was like we've doubled USG, US commercial now, from 50 to 100, 100, 200. I believe we will double it again this year. So, in any case, some of this is unknown, but we are working very aggressively. The other thing I would say outside of the US, again, a slightly longer answer, but one of the ways people look at Palantir is, if you're going to, I think a financial analyst likes to, what we would have called in science, normalize the data. What you in finance would probably call strip out the inorganic inputs. But if you're stripping out the inorganic inputs, you also have to look at what I would essentially view as an inorganic input of COVID in Europe. If you strip, and so Europe has been slow for us last year, which is one of the reasons why we are only at 41% last year, and growth would be even higher. Europe grew, if you include SPACs, at 9%, so slightly above what's probably inflation. But there we're taking the opportunity, believing there'll be a handoff from USG to US Com to Europe to rebuild with some very, very strong salespeople who've come from the best companies, believing that that's an environment where we can really do that. So there's 2 ways to look at this. Just on that angle, you could say, well, what could you do to gas charge America? We're working on that, and very, very aggressively, and most of our sales hires today are focused on that. But there's another more long-term thing. If we're right that the world wants Silicon Valley the way it was, meaning a handoff from government to commercial to the rest, commercial U.S. to the rest of the world, and with each one with a lag, America to Europe 18 months, the rest of this company only has to grow, everything besides Europe, commercial 38% to get 30% growth in aggregate. So getting Europe to track better, both from a handoff of what happens in America to Europe and with more conventional sales approach, is kind of what we're looking at getting done this year and see the fruits of it next year.
And just a quick follow-up on the government. I know you had a tough comp. It did decelerate pretty materially in Q1 in terms of the growth. Can you give us your perspective on what's happening on the government side?
Well, there's a couple things that are happening there. So if you were looking at this more like from a scientific perspective, you had a time series that's 15 years. First thing you would do is say, okay, what's happening in that time series over the 15 years? What you see in U.S. Gov is a compounded growth of 30%, but like this, which is, the positive of U.S. Gov is it's reliable, the sums are big, the quality of the revenue is very high. There are a number of problems, but biggest problem is barrier to entry, which we've clearly solved, and then re-barriers to entry, which we've solved or are solving, but that's going very well. And then the second one is lumpiness. Now that lumpiness still exists, and actually in some ways it's worse, because to get the integral to grow, you need these massive deals. We also have small deals, but de facto we are on the biggest, most important parts of the U.S. government, or our software is. So there's really a twofold answer to your question. One, what will happen this year? Is the deceleration an actual one over a long time series? The answer is clearly no. But then the question is, if the baseline is 30, how does it get to where we want it, which was like the beginning of last year and not at the end of last year? And the way that happens is the deals we're already positioned to win actually close. And so then you get into the granularity of what will happen in the U.S. government, who gets the deals if there's no new budget. There's a lot of granularity there, which we should probably do a better job of sharing. But the short answer is, it's like whose chair gets pulled first. The people who are trying to enter the market first, last. So the new startups, totally screwed, because the people who are not sitting on crucial programs, partially screwed. The people that have software or products that are useful in the past but have the right connections probably do. What's another version of this is, if you just look at that chart I showed you with the CAGR on Foundry, these are the most important programs for a dangerous world. Now, can't go into all the details, but we used to debate with people, especially my academic friends, if the world was dangerous. The danger of the world being clear and present to the U.S. government is very protective. It doesn't guarantee that, when this integral actually, how it behaves, but it makes it much more likely that it will happen in year and positively affect our revenue, which is another reason why I suspect that we will do well.
Great. Thanks, Brent. Our next question comes from Palantir shareholder Chase P.
Yeah, thanks so much for fielding my question. I really appreciate the opportunity. First and foremost, congratulations on all the hard work. It seems like you guys have a great team and are executing really well. From a retail investor perspective, the most negative sentiment I hear regarding Palantir is in regards to the dilution of shares outstanding over the past 12 to 18 months, and primarily in relation to stock-based compensation that's occurred. Other than the remaining shares to be vested that have already been announced, can we expect further dilution and share offerings going forward, or is it kind of reasonable to assume that the majority of this was from the IPO process and sort of a one-time event for the company? Once again, thanks and congratulations on all the hard work and business developments.
Thank you, and I really appreciate you, investors. Thanks for investing and the faith you have in us. Okay, so there's like the simple version, which I think, it's like, so there's stock-based comp and there's dilution. The dilution thing, that's a red herring. We're not issuing a lot of new shares. I think it's like in the $9 million range. And so it would be a little coy of me to say that's like no issue, move on. The thing to understand about Palantir, and then I want to just hit this, is like, it's actually not the result of the DPO. It's the result of the fact that we were completely focused on building product. We had no earthly idea we were going to DPO till like right before we did it. And so most companies are, quite frankly, built so that when analysts look at it, the primary customer of most software companies is not the client, it's the software analyst. So it's like we obviously, our primary client are our clients, which doesn't mean, now we're thinking about how do we expose the data in a way that, people on the outside like you and professional analysts and others can look at the data and get a better sense of what's tracking and what's not tracking. But the primary source of a lot of these questions really comes down to, look, we built the company to support the U.S. warfighter primarily, and then dual use it for the glory of humanity, particularly humanity in the West. That was our idea. And because our primary client was not what someone at a hedge fund would think, we didn't actually think of these things from inception. And so now there's a process of normalization. You're going to see that in going forward on these calls. It's like, how do you normalize? How do you provide data that people can look at? How do you provide data that people can understand, that they're used to seeing, while simultaneously staying true to what our mission is? It's like our primary clients are the people we're serving. We're in full line with them, and that's why we survive. Even with the nascent sales force, you can get things to double, which is insane. So then you get to stock-based comp, which is like, okay, so there's two parts of it. Of course, IRI people kind of don't want me to do any kind of forward-looking math, but if you're smart enough to invest in Palantir, you're smart enough to figure out there's essentially there's the how are we comping people, and there will be a normalization that will get us into a range where you would see in a software company within the next 18 months, latest 2 years. But there's essentially, and that's going to take a little time. It is going to happen because it's also very much linked to another question, which is how do you actually run the company so it's profitable someday on a GAAP basis, not stripping out comp, and that is also within eyesight. And those are goals for Palantir, because same reason we have no debt, same reason we have $2.3 billion on our balance sheet. This is a company built for bad times. Bad times mean strong finances internally, and that means at some point you have to be GAAP profitable. You can't be GAAP profitable if you're diluting people, or your stock-based comp is totally is not in conformity with other companies. So you're seeing a normalization. This will change. It will change in the relatively near future. It'll be linked to other things that we believe are important for Palantir, like having a company that thrives in bad times. And bad times are very good for Palantir because we build products that are robust, that are built for danger, and then the finances internally are actually built for bad times. And bad times means you have free cash flow. The free cash flow turns into GAAP profit. That means the stock-based comp has to be one that's aligned with our investors. Also, because that's basically, it's part of a little bit longer philosophical narrative, but like if software is the only moat, then value and growth shares have to be evaluated in terms of their value. Value only exists if you can actually get a tech moat, call it, that maybe it's something besides, and growth only exists if you build a company that is where the technology is strong enough, the business fundamentals are strong enough that the free cash flow actually turns into GAAP profitability, and that's linked to stock-based comp. So this is a priority both because you care, but also, quite frankly, because it is the health of our company, which we care a lot about.
Great, thank you, Chase. Our next question is from Keith Weiss with Morgan Stanley. Keith, you'll receive a prompt to unmute, and please ensure your video is on.
Excellent. Thank you guys for taking the question, and thank you, Alex. and
hey, neighbors in New Hampshire.
Upstate New York, close. So two questions. One on the product side of the equation, and the other on sort of investments into 2022. On the product side of the equation, Alex, maybe I hope you can help us sort of better understand the product roadmap on a go-forward basis, how you guys are thinking about it from a high level. From our perspective, you guys did a really nice job of better modularizing the platform and made it more adoptable by commercial enterprises, and I think it looks like we've seen that traction in terms of customer adoption. What's kind of on a go-forward basis? Is there more activity of that ilk, if you will? Do you create more pre-built solutions, if you will, more directly target some of the sort of opportunities that you've been used for, but productize it, if you will? Is that a potential product direction? And then on the other side of the equation, in terms of investments, investing for growth into 2022, I was hoping you could give us a little bit of visibility into the nature of those investments. Is it just sales headcount? Is it the forward deployed engineers? How should we think about where those dollars are being deployed? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. And so actually, to my perspective, they're very much linked. Our primary investment in growth is investment in product, and we're doing a number of things in product. The things we've talked about at a general level is kind of making our product more modular. There's a slightly more macro riff here, which is that we were adversarial with IT structurally until recently. We were adversarial because from our perspective, there's a learning process where they had to build these things. Now there's a myriad of companies. They're all honestly technically hard to indistinguishable, doing data lakes and all sorts of things that help IT people build something that is working for them to do certain things. And we were adversarial because they were like, okay, this Foundry thing, yeah, great, but we've already built these things. You would replace this. It honestly could also make us look bad. No one wants it. Also, the average sale price for Palantir Foundry across our business, I think last year was like 6.5 million. Most IT people prefer a small bite and consumption. You can argue whether that's the right model, but instead of fighting them, it's probably better to figure out a way to get our product more in their hands. So that's kind of the known part. What we've been working on recently, which is less known, is what we're really working on is we believe that people are paying a lot now for consumption and compute. No critique. But in reality, that's very much like paying for gas and oil exploration. But what people are really going to want is the ability to use the fully digested product. It's like when you drive your car, that's minerals and oil products and all sorts of chemicals built into your car, finished product. So, and we're going to build both modules that are reflective of Foundry, but also new ones in areas that we understand and quite frankly we know will be built in the near future, so that things we know are working, things that we suspect will work in the future, so that the nodes not only work separately but can work together. So de facto, we believe the compute of tomorrow won't be just compute. It will be productized compute. And that's what we're actually working on in rebuilding Foundry. So now, there's still, that doesn't mean like the Foundry as an aggregate, we can do the whole thing tomorrow thing. Massively valuable. And we're working on very, very large deals where companies are like, look, we want to transform what we're doing or take what we're doing and export it to every company in our industry tomorrow. De facto, that's a Foundry use case, and I don't think there's anything else that does that. Because you can take, for example, there's a very large company in the healthcare space, and it's like they have a very interesting way of doing healthcare. They can't sell it to other people without that essentially being a software offering. Building that would be 3 years, or it could be 2 weeks. So that we're very much committed to continuing doing, because there's like we're an N of 1 there. But where we want to be is an N of 1 on not just making it small. We like that because then we see the IT departments now saying, okay, well, we have all these things, and now we want to migrate here, and then selling them something that they can actually bite into. So it's because the primary resistance to Palantir has never been lack of Salesforce, it's been resistance on inside of the IT structure. And so now we're going to give them something they want, and then also build an ecosystem around it. So it's what I think people will want going forward. And so people can stop just buying pure compute. They can buy valuable compute. And so that's actually a big project. I would say on that end and on these other ends, what's particularly interesting, I mean, it's obvious, but it's not just the dollars. It's like who's spending them. Just like the charisma of what we're doing. We're a company that's like 15 years old and say like from revenue, 18 years old from concept. Is a company like ours should be getting declining talent. The talent we're getting now is the best in the world. It's the best we've ever gotten. And we're getting people who used to be at Palantir. Everyone knows how good our people who are coming back. Just like no company of our pedigree gets people coming back. And the reason they're coming back is because this is just fucking cool. It's like you do this, you change the world. Now, there's a lot of other things we're working on the side to actually. One of the things we failed at, honestly, is capturing the value of what we've done. Most of the products you would see on a map in an industry, any company, they're delivering things we built 7 years ago. We failed in capturing the value of that. We're not going to fail again. We failed in capturing the value of that because we were selling to IT and selling to people in an adversarial way. And we were 7 years, 8 years ahead, but they can't actually interact with you. That's not the right way to do it. And we're not going to do it that way in America, so we're building a specialized sales, which means it will take longer to get it to work because we're working. And in Europe, we have it differentiated on the idea that, so if you just look at the raw numbers, if you look at where we're investing in, it's like sales hires, very high-end salespeople in Europe, and then the rest is just like the best tech engineers in the world because we know we get them, we retain them, and it's just very differentiated.
That's super helpful.
Great, thanks, Keith. Our next question comes from Palantir shareholder Brian L.
Dr. Karp, thank you for taking my question, and thank you for furthering the ideals of Western democracy around the globe. Of the 1,000+ roles that you intend to hire this year, how many of those will be focused on sales?
So we're looking to hire 200 salespeople, basically, and everyone else is like just like in the past. So the way I think about it is like 70 ex salespeople. It's like still 75% technical. We're going to try and hire 200 salespeople, and then as I mentioned, we just hired some very high-end sales acumen in Europe. Yeah. Thank you for your question, and thank you for being an investor.
Great, thanks, Brian. Our next question comes from Mark Cash with Morningstar. Mark, you'll receive a prompt to unmute your line, and please ensure your video is on.
Yes, thanks for taking the question. Kind of going off what you were just talking about, there's been commentary in the past around becoming the operating system for commercial industries. You talked about airline industry, maybe just talked about healthcare for a little bit there. But are there other examples, industry examples you could talk about how that's pulling in customers to standardize operations around Palantir? Thank you.
Thank you. There are a lot of the new deals we're working. So it's like if you look at the timeline of Palantir, 2 years ago it was all kind of, 3 years ago it was like analytics and operations, and what you see now is kind of people building off of wanting a standardized, productized version of what we did at Airbus, what we've done internally at BP, what we did with Lilium, and so what I can tell you is, like, of the very big deals we're working on now, they're almost all this. It's like we used to have to educate people; they didn't believe us. And it's interesting. I do think it's like, obviously there was also just the COVID distribution thing. I mean, COVID distribution in England. England is not one healthcare system. It's 600 hospitals that are countries. It's like 600 countries, and this is true. And so just seeing this happen, or networks of people hearing this happen, is the reason why you have 80% organic growth in the U.S. ex SPAC, and with almost no salespeople. It's because people are now like, okay, now the caveat here is this is not for everybody. So there's like, not everybody wants, where this is particularly valuable is you have a business that is not protected by a moat, but has real insights on how to do something and wants to take over their industry. So it's like you're sitting there, you have a product that is maybe the best in the world, maybe the second best in the world, but it's not protected. But you do have insights that are for the software you could take over your market. And that's where we're seeing is the thing that's really changed is, for once, it's not me fighting my way into the person's office and then throwing me out. It's them calling and saying, no, we know this can work. The pilot phases now are like days. And then we're on, and so like, and we're working on 2 or 3 of these now. It's like, it's very, very exciting. The one thing I would say as a caveat though is, it's a little bit, we are both working on this and working on modularization with equal force. Because, and they're just not the same thing. Somebody who wants this is not buying modular Palantir. They want the whole Foundry thing. And what they want help with is like, well, how would we identify people to hire to write to your platform? That's actually a big new question. Like, where can we find people? They don't have to be Palantir quality software engineers. Those are just too rare. But, and what we're doing with our platform is making it so that just smart people can actually write to it. And so that increases our TAM a lot, because smart and smart enough, or specialized smart to write code at the level you write it here, those are just completely different TAMs.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Our next question is from Palantir shareholder Juan V.
Hey Alex, thank you for taking my question. My question to you is, in a recent interview, Shyam said that what AWS was for developers last decade, Foundry really will be for developers this decade. Can you expand on what plans Palantir has to make Foundry available to a broader developer community? Again, thank you for taking my question, and thank you for allowing a retail investor like myself to have a seat at the table. It's much appreciated, doesn't go unnoticed. Bye.
see myself as a retail investor, and I have all my assets in Palantir. So I'm very happy to meet another retail investor. Hope, in any case. So, you know, we've done these like Founder for Builders programs in America and in France, and like, you know, it's not charity. It's because we want people in the tech community broadly to learn how to write to Palantir. We also want to learn from them. So that's one very important program, not revenue based, but it's essentially very valuable for our tech development and very valuable to get technically literate people on Palantir so they can see what they can do and tell us what they can't do. Then there's the broader commercial. You know, a lot of the companies we've supplied and government agencies who supplied to Palantir, it's like they require an ability to write to Foundry or to one of our products as like a core competence. And like, so one of the things we know, so we're obviously figuring out ways how we can train people, how we can make that experience easier, how can we widen the aperture. And by the way, obviously not just because, you know, it's like, it's not just for the altruistic reasons that are obvious. It's like, if you want people who are valuable now to be valuable tomorrow, they must be able to interact with the software platform. So that's like one of the reasons we've had a lot of adoption, because if you take, you know, a company like Chrysler Fiat, which has very talented people, and, you know, it's they need to be able to write to the platform. And so that's, and then work with the platform. So we're working on that partly for political reasons and partly because obviously it's very good for you as an investor in Palantir, and we're proud of that.
Great, thanks, Juan. Our next question is from Phil Winslow with Credit Suisse. Phil, you'll receive a prompt to unmute your line, and please ensure your video is on.
Hey, thanks for taking my question, and I do appreciate the cohort data that you disclosed today. That was very helpful. Just to dig in on that a little bit, you know, Alex, you talked about starting to see inflection where Palantir is getting pulled into some of these commercial deals, sort of asking for Palantir without even knowing necessarily that's what they needed. You see that in the cohort number on the commercial side in terms of the new for 2021. I'm curious if we could just dig into that a little bit. Are you seeing specific industries really start to have that aha moment, you know, get it? Are there certain use cases that they're leaning into? And then just have one follow-up to that.
You know, what makes Palantir Foundry valuable is that it's not really industry dependent, and this is crucial for us because our sales force is so nascent. So we're very dependent on where either there's a crisis, or where, again, that crisis, or where somebody actually wants to enter a market they're not in and wants to expand. So I would say in the past we were very, very dependent on manufacturing. So like our high-level engineering companies like BP and others, because we de facto needed the engineering talent because no one else believed us the product was differentiated. Now it is much more standard businesses of all kinds. And so just like really the who's who of American business, from like, you know, people building tractors to building cars to oil and gas to distribution. And there's no one kind of company. Where we do not do well is like, yeah, we're not going to sell to a marketing company. You know, it's like we don't bother talking to them. They don't call us. We're not good at marketing. Like they apparently are. They're so good at marketing they don't have to quantify their results. Yeah. So, by the way, one of the places, you know, Europe, one of the interesting ways to look at our business, by the way, since you're in Europe and since I have an affinity to your region, Liechtenstein, Schweiz, is, you know, it's that Europe in general has, like, you know, grew slower, and that's the, you know, if you assume that comes back online, it's just going to be bombastic. One of the places, though, we're actually very strong in Europe is Switzerland. And there you have, like, a lot of the pharmaceuticals, insurance companies, banks that can't be mentioned using our products. And I think they use it, honestly, because it's like there's a Swiss quality to Palantir. It's like a very high quality product. We deliver it. It will work. You're not going to get the charming slap on the back or the steak dinner, and your software's going to fucking work. So,
And then, yeah, just to follow up on that specifically, because obviously the net retention numbers that you have in U.S. government general is huge, U.S. commercial is huge. That's one thing I noticed just with the disclosure of the net retention is the non-U.S. Commercial significantly lower. What drives that, and how do you sort of inflect that higher?
Well, first of all, I do think there's a handoff function, and I think these things are actually repeating what happened in the earlier days in America, when is like where you have a handoff built in government because you have more time to actually get it right. Handoff to commercial, go to Europe. I do think in general, certain Swiss institutions, certain German institutions, certain French institutions, are not included, where it is slower. Like if you are building something very, very new, it will be adopted a little later. But then there's also just the COVID. The reaction to COVID in Europe was different than in America. While it slowed things down in America, it didn't really stop them. And so what I suspect is going to happen is that Europe, because of COVID reopening and because of basically people copying what's happening in highly adaptive America and sometimes in Switzerland, you will see the European cohort grow. But again, to just make it a little more quantitative, we have I think 150% net dollar retention in U.S. commercial. Again, a number which we're getting with basically no one holding it up. So I don't know how this works at other companies, but I think if I were a scientist, I'd want to normalize that number. But even non-normalized, this is a very strong number. What we are going to show is net dollar retention in the U.S., and over time we're going to show how this expands outside the U.S. And that I think what you'll begin to see is that this strength in the U.S. will go outside the U.S. and will make our business very, very robust.
Got it. All right. Thanks for the time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. So Alex, we've received over 1,000 questions from shareholders. Obviously can't take them all. Are there any parting wisdom or parting thoughts that you want to offer about the business to our shareholders?
It's really tough times out there. Really tough for a lot of businesses. It's a lot of things are going wrong in the world, in our world. The obvious danger, the lack of legitimacy in a lot of our institutions. And I can tell you while at Palantir we are very, very focused on our business, and bad times are very super motivational for us. And when we get to good times, we'll be even stronger. And we're a little bit of a wacky group of guerrilla warfighters, but we're very much in fighting mode. And not just for us and the West, but also for our shareholders. And hope to talk to you soon. Thank you.
Das war's. Im Chat wird fleißig diskutiert. Also ganz ehrlich, Alex Karp wird oft kritisiert, dass er irgendwie nicht ins Bild passt eines typischen Geschäftsführers. Gestern habe ich einen Kommentar bekommen von wegen, er soll sich mal einen Anzug anziehen, sich mal die Haare kämmen und so weiter. Ganz oft sind es aber die Geschäftsführer, die eben nicht so in das typische Bild passen, die am Ende die größten Visionäre sind. Ja, Steve Jobs oder ein Elon Musk oder wie heißt der Typ von Twitter und Blog? Ist mir sein Name entfallen. Aber das ist auch so ein Typ, der komplett aus der Reihe fällt. Und ganz oft braucht man gar nicht so dieses ins Bild passen und dieses Konformsein mit den Werten und Vorstellungen der Wall Street und all das, sondern es kommt darauf an, ob am Ende das Unternehmen fundamental abliefert. Ja? Und ich glaube, um nochmal ganz kurz auf die Zahlen zurückzukommen, die wir vorhin gesehen haben, wir sehen, dass sich das Wachstum bei Palantir weiter beschleunigt, dass viele Grundpfeiler, wie zum Beispiel den Aufbau eines Vertriebsteams, was man argumentieren kann, über viele Jahre verschlafen wurde, aber jetzt immerhin nachgeholt wird, dass all diese Dinge gerade stattfinden und ich glaube, das fundamentale Geschäft von Palantir steht gerade erst am Anfang. Und dass die Börse so kurzfristig jetzt auf die mangelnde Profitabilität von Palantir schaut und sagt, oh, 2 Cent statt 4 Cent Gewinn pro Aktie, lass uns mal die Aktie um 15% abverkaufen. Das ist am Ende des Tages ein Vorteil, den wir als Kleinanleger gegenüber den ganz Großen haben. Denn die Großen, die Hedgefondsmanager, die Money Manager, die Family Offices, die eben das Geld der reichen Leute verwalten, die haben eine ganz große Problematik, nämlich diesen permanenten Leistungsdruck, Quartal für Quartal Performance abzuliefern. Da geht es wirklich auf Quartalssicht gesehen. Und wenn die Leute nicht abliefern, dann packen diese reichen Leute ihre Koffer und schieben ihr Geld eben woanders hin, wo sie mehr Performance vermuten. Das heißt, diese großen Fonds und Banken haben einen sehr kurzfristigen Erfolgsdruck und versuchen deshalb sozusagen permanent den aktuellen Trend zu erkennen und hinterher zu jagen und zu rotieren, rein in Value, raus aus Value, rein in Growth und Wachstum, raus aus Wachstumsaktien, hin und her. Und der gewiefte Kleinanleger, der kann sich zurücklehnen und das große ganze Bild versuchen zu verstehen und die langfristigen Trends zu erkennen und da eben dann ganz entspannt rein investieren. Und ich glaube, in Bezug auf das Thema Datenaggregation, Datenanalyse, Datenintegration und Kombination steht Palantir an der Speerspitze. Ich kenne kein anderes Unternehmen und ich habe mir eigentlich alle Unternehmen aus diesem Sektor angeschaut, die fundamental so stark dastehen wie Palantir. Und diese Meinung hat sich nach dem heutigen Quartalsbericht bei mir eigentlich nur verfestigt. Insofern, ja, die Aktie fällt. Ich habe hier gerade Tesla witzigerweise auf und nicht Palantir. Kleinen Moment, wir machen nochmal schnell die Vorbörse auf hier. Aktuell minus 10,6%. Das ist schmerzhaft und ich verstehe jeden, der sagt, verdammt, warum stecke ich in diese Aktie? Das große Problem ist dann, glaube ich, an der Stelle die Erwartungshaltung. Ja? Wenn du die Palantir-Aktie gekauft hast, weil du auf das schnelle Geld gehofft hast, dann muss ich ganz einfach sagen, dass es die falsche Strategie war für dich an der Stelle. Denn ein Unternehmen, das also gerade so profitabel ist, und wenn man dann noch sozusagen den Gap-EPS anschaut, also den Gap-Gewinn pro Aktie sogar weiterhin verlustträchtig ist, also gerade so an der Grenze zur Profitabilität entlang schlittert. Eine solche Aktie hat es in der aktuellen Marktphase total schwierig. Ja? Und ich wäre nicht überrascht, wenn gleich die Börse öffnet, dass wir dann nochmal den Tiefpunkt, den wir gerade eben hier erreicht haben bei $12, nochmal austesten oder sogar darunter. Ja? Ich wäre da nicht überrascht. Das heißt, jeder, der hier frustriert ist an dieser Stelle, nachvollziehbar, verständlich, es ist eben tatsächlich und es bleibt ein langfristiges Investment. Ich setze das gerne immer so ein bisschen mit einem Immobilienprojekt gleich. Also stell dir vor, ich würde dich anrufen und ich würde dich fragen, hey, hast du Lust, dass wir gemeinsam in ein Immobilienprojekt investieren? Und ich sagte, ja, du, ich glaube, wir stecken hier ein bisschen Geld rein und dann möbeln wir die Immobilie auf und das wird eine Mordsrendite geben. Ja? Wir können den Wert massiv steigern. Du überweist mir das Geld und wir legen also mit dem Projekt los. Würdest du mich eine Woche, 2 Wochen oder 4 Wochen später anrufen und nach deiner Rendite fragen? Natürlich nicht. Denn ein Immobilienprojekt ist natürlich etwas wahnsinnig Langfristiges. Ja? Das muss man erstmal planen, da muss man erstmal Kapital vorschießen, dann muss man das Ganze aufbauen, entwickeln, etc. pp. Aber das Interessante ist doch, dass bei einer Immobilie dieses Mindset, diese Einstellung ganz normal ist und ganz alltäglich ist, dass aber bei einer Aktie ganz viele Leute eine ganz andere Erwartungshaltung haben, komischerweise. Ja, die kaufen eine Aktie und wenn die in der nächsten Woche nicht durch die Decke geht, dann ist das ein Scheißunternehmen und man bereut es, investiert zu haben. Dabei ist doch eine Aktie im Grunde nur sozusagen ein kleines Kuchenstück eines Unternehmens, und ein Unternehmen ist wie ein Immobilienprojekt etwas, das sich über einen langen Zeitraum aufbauen muss. Und deswegen verstehe ich immer nicht diese Diskrepanz in der Erwartungshaltung, dass es immer ganz schnell gehen muss und Rendite jetzt und Rendite gleich und am besten noch 3- und 4-stellig. Das liegt vielleicht auch daran, dass wir gerade aus einer Marktphase kommen. Gerade im letzten Jahr sind sehr viele neu an die Börse gekommen und es war im Grunde egal, was du gekauft hast. Alles ist durch die Decke gegangen und das nicht zu knapp. Viele haben jetzt diese Erwartungshaltung, dass das der Normalzustand an der Börse wäre. Ja, du kaufst was und morgen ist es 10% im Plus und einen Monat später hast du 100% gemacht. Das ist nicht der Normalzustand. Das ist nicht der Normalzustand, sondern ich glaube, wir kommen jetzt in den Normalzustand zurück, dass nämlich die fundamentale Entwicklung zählt und die braucht eben Zeit. Die braucht Zeit. Und da ist Palantir keine Ausnahme, aber wer Alex Karp zugehört hat, der kann, glaube ich, zuversichtlich sein. Und vor allen Dingen, wer sich die Zahlen angeschaut, der kann zuversichtlich sein, dass die Firma fundamental gesehen gut dasteht und deswegen bleibe ich auch investiert bei Palantir mit meiner vollen Position und sollte es stärkere Rücksetzer geben, heute oder in den nächsten Tagen. Ich meine, wir sind ja immer noch, wenn wir mal etwas rauszoomen, gehen wir mal hier auf den Tageschart. Wir hatten ja am 24. Januar ein Tiefpunkt bei 11,75. Aktuell stehen wir da noch deutlich drüber, nämlich knapp 6% über dem Tiefpunkt aus dem Januar. Und der IPO-Preis, also der allererste Ausgabepreis der Aktie, lag übrigens ungefähr bei $9. Da wären sozusagen noch vom aktuellen Niveau gemessen 28% Luft zum IPO-Preis. Was ich sagen will, wenn es in den nächsten Tagen, und wahrscheinlich werde ich diese typische 3-Tages-Regel hier anwenden, dass man sozusagen erstmal 3 Tage wartet, bis sich so die Paper Hands ausgeschüttelt haben, bis die Panik verflogen ist. Sollte es in diesem Zeitraum stärkere Kurskorrekturen geben, dann werde ich das als Chance sehen, mein Investment zu erhöhen. Ich weiß, viele sehen das dann immer als ins Messer greifen. Das ist aber einfach nicht meine Mentalität, sondern ich sage, ich habe Palantir bei 14 gekauft, ich habe Palantir bei $16 gekauft, ich habe Palantir bei $18 gekauft. Warum soll ich jetzt Palantir nicht bei 10, 11, $12 kaufen? Das macht keinen Sinn, weil ich fundamental einen Plan für dieses Unternehmen für 2025 und 2030 habe und es, solange diese These dann auch stimmt, am Ende relativ irrelevant ist, ob ich die Aktie bei 10, bei 12 oder bei 14 gekauft habe. Ja? Solange sozusagen diese große Geschichte weiter intakt bleibt und ich sehe sie weiter intakt. Meine Güte, viel geredet. Das war's von mir. Es bleibt spannend, was die Aktie macht, wenn die Börse in knapp 35 Minuten öffnet. Vielen Dank fürs Zuschauen. Bis zum nächsten Video. Ich danke euch. Ciao.